Children in the 1940s played outside until nightfall. Neighbors left doors unlocked, and fear seemed almost foreign. Yet today, even though crime is often lower than it was back then, most Americans feel less safe than ever. The secret isn't just about statistics, it is about the way streets, routines, and relationships once created a shield that even technology can't replace. What did American neighborhoods have in the 1940s that we systematically lost? And could we have kept that feeling of safety all along? National crime data from the mid-20th century tells a complicated story. In 1940, the United States homicide rate stood at 4.7 per 100,000 people. That number edged up to around 5 by 1945 and hovered near 5 through the end of the decade. By comparison, the national rate in 2019 was almost identical, just under 5 per 100,000 people. Property crime rates in the 1940s, where measured, ranged from about 600 to 800 per 100,000, far below the peaks of the 1970s and the 1980s, but not dramatically lower than some modern years. In New York City, the official robbery rate in 1940 was around 150 per 100,000 residents. By 1980, that figure had soared past 1,000, only to drop back to roughly 250 by the 2010s. Cleveland's property crime rates followed a similar arc. They were estimated at 500 to 700 per 100,000 in the 1940s, rising above 6,000 by the 1980s, then falling to about 2,500 in recent years. These numbers, drawn from FBI and city police archives, show that the 1940s were not a crime-free golden age. The data reveal a landscape where violence and theft existed, sometimes at rates matching or exceeding those of today. Yet the sense of safety on American streets was shaped by more than statistics. 60% of Americans today say they feel unsafe walking alone at night, even as national crime rates fall below many levels from the 1940s. Polls like Gallup's annual crime survey reveal a stubborn gap between official statistics and public anxiety. This is not just a recent phenomenon. Even when the homicide rate matches that of the 1940s, most people report a stronger sense of danger now than their grandparents did. The numbers themselves can be misleading. Official crime data depends on what is reported and recorded, and in the 1940s, many incidents, especially minor thefts or neighborhood disputes, never made it into police files. Modern crime reporting is more comprehensive, but that is not translated into greater trust or comfort. Surveys show that even in cities where crime has dropped for decades, the majority still believe things are getting worse. People rely on lived experience, not spreadsheets. The question is not just how many crimes happen, but what makes a place feel safe or threatening. If statistics alone cannot explain the difference, what else shapes the way Americans experience their streets and neighborhoods? A typical street in the 1940s offered a clear, uninterrupted view from doorsteps to sidewalks. Houses sat just 10 to 20 feet from the curb, their front porches and living rooms facing the public world. The design was intentional, with narrow lots, minimal setbacks, and a lack of high fences that brought neighbors into daily contact and turned the street itself into a silent guardian. Large windows looked out over the sidewalk, inviting both observation and interaction. As Jane Jacobs later described it, there must be eyes upon the street, eyes belonging to those we might call the natural proprietors of the street. In these neighborhoods, the architecture didn't just shelter families. It shaped how people moved, saw, and were seen. Each porch became a lookout post, each window a stage for daily life. The rhythm of people coming and going, kids walking to school, and adults heading to the corner store, meant that someone was always watching, even if only in passing. Garages, when present, were tucked behind houses, never blocking the sightlines that linked one home to the next. The street's openness made strangers stand out and discouraged trouble before it could start. The layout of these blocks created a web of mutual visibility. Safety wasn't enforced by rules or patrols, but by the simple fact that everyone could see what was happening. In the 1940s, the street itself acted as a quiet witness, connecting architecture to behavior in ways that made neighborhoods feel watched, and as a result, safe. Everyday life in America in the 1940s depended on walking. Most families ran errands on foot, with nearly 80% of daily trips, grocery runs, school drop-offs, and visits to the hardware store happening within a short 5 or 10-minute walk from home. Streets were designed so that schools, shops, and public transit clustered close, forming a tight web of destinations. This kept sidewalks busy from sunrise to evening, as adults and children overlapped on their way to work, class, or the corner market. Morning routines produced clusters of kids heading to school together, often joined by neighbors who recognized every face along the way. After school, those same sidewalks filled up again as children stopped by the bakery, ran into friends, or helped with family errands. Parents could rely on a constant stream of familiar eyes, shopkeepers, teachers, and other adults who noticed if something felt out of place. Neighborhood catchments were small by design. Most errands or visits took place within a quarter-mile or half-mile radius, making it easy for routines to overlap. The local pharmacist or grocer often knew entire families by name, and regular foot traffic meant that strangers stood out quickly. This dense pattern of movement was not just about convenience, it formed a living safety net. People were not just passing through, they were participating in a daily exchange of glances, greetings, and quiet supervision. The simple act of walking to the store or school became a powerful engine for neighborhood vigilance, turning ordinary routines into a shared responsibility for safety. Families in the 1940s often spent decades on the same block, surrounded by neighbors whose faces rarely changed. The average American today moves nearly 12 times in a lifetime, but back then roots ran deep. School teachers, bakers, and shopkeepers became familiar figures, not just for years, but for generations. In these stable neighborhoods, relationships formed a kind of invisible web. Obligations ran both ways. If a child lingered too long at the corner store, the owner would notice. If a stranger appeared at the soda fountain, regulars would exchange glances, quietly alert. Third places, corner grocers, diners, barber shops, and church halls were everywhere, woven into the daily routes of residents. In some cities, soda fountains dotted main streets every few blocks, serving as informal headquarters for gossip, errands, and watchful eyes. These spots weren't just conveniences, they were the backbone of neighborhood life. Proprietors knew the habits of their regulars, and their presence alone discouraged trouble. A walk to the store could mean running into 3 or 4 neighbors, each one part of a living network of recognition and quiet accountability. This dense pattern of local relationships made it hard for anyone to go unnoticed. The simple act of being known by name, by family, by routine, acted as a powerful deterrent. Strangers stood out, and so did unusual behavior. Safety wasn't enforced by patrols or policy, but by the shared understanding that everyone was, in some way, responsible for everyone else. On a city block in the 1940s, it was not unusual to find a doctor living next door to a machinist, a teacher upstairs from a factory foreman, or a small business owner sharing a stoop with a postal clerk. Census records from the era show that in cities like Chicago and Philadelphia, more than 60% of neighborhoods housed at least 3 different occupational groups within a few blocks. This blend was not just a quirk of history, it was a quiet engine of stability. When families from different backgrounds shared the same sidewalks and corner stores, there were more eyes watching out for trouble, more adults invested in the daily life of the street. Children played under the loose supervision of a whole community, not just their parents. Shopkeepers, nurses, and laborers all recognized each other's kids and routines. If something felt off, like a stranger lingering or a window left open, someone noticed. By the 1960s, this pattern had begun to unravel. As zoning laws and post-war policies encouraged single-family suburbs and restricted who could live where, the old mix thinned out. Census data reveals a sharp drop in block-level diversity. The percentage of urban tracts with 3 or more occupational classes fell by nearly a third between 1940 and 1960. The result was a patchwork of neighborhoods increasingly defined by a single income level or profession, making it easier for outsiders to slip through unnoticed and harder for residents to rely on the informal safety net that once came from cross-class familiarity. The gradual loss of this economic integration quietly chipped away at the sense of collective guardianship that had made so many American neighborhoods feel secure. In 1947, a stretch of potato fields on Long Island began its transformation into Levittown, the first mass-produced suburb in America. Over the next 4 years, more than 17,000 nearly identical homes rose in neat rows, each offered to returning GIS at prices as low as $7,990, with little or no money down thanks to government-backed GI Bill loans. William Levitt's assembly line approach turned home construction into a process as efficient as building cars. At the height of production, crews finished up to 30 houses a day, selling entire blocks before the paint was dry. By 1951, tens of thousands of families, mostly young, white, and upwardly mobile, had swapped city stoops for lawns and driveways. For a typical professional couple, the move promised more than just a house. Levittown offered privacy, a garage for the family car, and the dream of space to raise children away from city crowds. But this exodus drained urban neighborhoods of teachers, small business owners, and doctors who had once anchored city blocks and watched over local streets. The buyers of Levittown weren't just chasing square footage, they were following a new model of American life, one that prized private space over shared sidewalks. The ripple effects reached back to the cities they left behind, stripping them of leaders and familiar faces, and leaving a void where tight-knit networks had once kept watch. Privacy, once a luxury, became the new American ideal as post-war suburbs took shape. Garage doors replaced front porches as the dominant feature facing the street. Houses turned inward, with fenced yards and blinds drawn, while cul-de-sacs wound through neighborhoods designed to keep outsiders out and keep cars in. These layouts did not just shield families from their neighbors, they erased the constant, casual oversight that once defined street life. The sidewalk became an afterthought, often interrupted by driveways and hedges, while garages dominated the view from the curb. As the family car grew from status symbol to necessity, residential speed limits crept up. By the 1950s, 30 miles per hour was standard in many neighborhoods, making streets too dangerous for unsupervised play. Parents, once comfortable letting children roam, now watched anxiously as traffic replaced foot traffic. Technology stepped in, where neighborly vigilance faded. By the 2020s, millions of American homes had installed doorbell cameras and motion sensors, hoping to reclaim a sense of control. Yet these devices record mostly empty driveways and passing delivery vans, not the steady stream of familiar faces that once made a block feel safe. The sight lines that once stretched from porch to sidewalk have been replaced by digital feeds, constant surveillance, but little human presence. The irony is hard to miss. The more Americans invest in security technology, the less they trust the world just outside their front doors. In the late 1930s, a new set of maps quietly redrew the boundaries of American neighborhoods, not with roads or fences, but with ink and policy. The Homeowners Loan Corporation, backed by the federal government, graded entire city blocks from A to D, using language such as infiltration of inharmonious racial groups to justify which areas received investment and which were cut off. These grades did not just describe conditions, they determined who could get a mortgage, who could build equity, and who was left to rent in declining neighborhoods. The Federal Housing Administration built on those lines. Its 1938 underwriting manual warned that property values depended on protection from adverse influences, and that stability meant avoiding heterogeneous populations. Homer Hoyt, chief economist for the HOLC, circulated memos flagging neighborhoods with even a single black or immigrant family as risky. The effect was to funnel credit and opportunity into new, white-only suburbs, while freezing out huge swaths of urban America. After World War II, the GI Bill extended home loans to millions of veterans, but in practice, those loans were almost always steered toward brand-new developments on the city's edge. A returning I could buy a house in Levittown with no money down and monthly payments lower than most city rents, but only if the veteran was white. The underwriting rules and HOLC grades made sure of it. By the early 1950s, these policies had shifted the American settlement map. Credit flowed to the suburbs, draining cities of investment and locking in patterns of segregation that would last for generations. The lines drawn by bankers and bureaucrats shaped not just where Americans lived, but who could feel secure in their own neighborhood. In the 1950s, the promise of progress arrived in the form of concrete and steel. Robert Moses, New York's most powerful planner, set out to build the Cross Bronx Expressway, a 6-lane highway meant to speed commuters from suburbs to Manhattan. The project came with a staggering price tag. $25 billion in federal funding launched the interstate highway system, and the Cross Bronx was one of its earliest and most controversial links. Construction crews cut a straight line through the heart of the Bronx, bulldozing entire blocks to make way for the new road. More than 5,000 families lost their homes. Apartment buildings, shops, and playgrounds vanished almost overnight, replaced by a trench of roaring traffic. For the neighborhoods in the Cross Bronx's path, the impact was immediate and permanent. Streets that once connected neighbors now ended abruptly at the edge of the expressway. Friends who had lived across the street found themselves separated by a wall of noise and pollution. Local businesses, cut off from their customers, shuttered their doors. The fabric of daily life, including school routes, corner stores, and front stoops, was torn apart. Residents who stayed behind described a new sense of isolation. Letters poured in to city officials, pleading for relief from the dust, the danger, the strangers who now passed through on their way to somewhere else. The Cross Bronx was only one example. Across the country, highways carved through city centers, displacing hundreds of thousands and fracturing communities that had once relied on walkability and mutual oversight. The physical rupture of these neighborhoods was not just a matter of lost homes. It severed the invisible lines of trust and recognition that had made city streets feel safe for generations. Today, most Americans move more than 11 times in a lifetime, and fewer than half know their neighbors' names. Urban design now shapes how safe we feel, often more than crime rates or technology. As cities debate their futures, the real question isn't nostalgia, but whether we are willing to rebuild the human networks that once made safety a shared responsibility. The blueprint is history, and what we build next is up to us.